You hear me? Thank you. All right, so you guys, I guess, are all taking American history. Let me guess, where are you? 1900? Later? World War I? World War II? How is that possible? You're going to run out of time. You're going to cover the whole course before May.
I'm asking myself the same thing, how that's possible. Hey, it's all right.
No, I have fond memories, and I do miss being in the classroom. Now, I've also been teaching for the state college system since 1993, and I still work as an adjunct and teach American history courses online. It's a little safer. My wife doesn't want me driving at night. She's afraid I might stop off somewhere on the way home and get in trouble. You know how it is. But anyway, my purpose for being here is to give you a brief overview of Prep's history, mostly through my own experience. So without further delay, I really just want to get to it, you know, and let's see how this works out. They got me all hooked up electronically. I'm wired. I haven't had anybody ask me about putting a wire on since 1968, so I don't know. All right, so here we go. So, Fairfield Prep, right? This school is quite amazing. The Society of Jesus was very intent on building a school here, or gaining a school here in Connecticut. There was a lot of fear about it. Would we interfere with Fordham and Fordham Prep and so on down the line? And there were other religious orders that were looking to build a school as well. In any event, what happened was they kept petitioning the Bishop McAuliffe. In those days, he was the Bishop of Hartford. There was no separate bishop in the Bridgeport area. And eventually, he agreed to open a school here in Connecticut. And in my book, I talk all about looking for the right place, you know, what would be the right spot to have the school. What they decided on was to go to buildings that were already created rather than build one from scratch. Not to mention it was very difficult because we were talking about World War II era here, and it was very difficult to get supplies, steel, wood, what have you. A lot of that was being petitioned and used by the military. So they bought this incredible place, the Jennings Estate, which all of us who were here for any length of time used to teach in. It was a beautiful building, as you can see. It's still there, and that was the first building. And they decided to call it McAuliffe Hall in honor of Bishop McAuliffe. And then the second building opened up for sale. That's across the way. It's Bellarmine Hall, and that was the former Lasher estate. I had some Lasher kids in my classes, you know, the families, good family, you know. And all these buildings go back to the Gilded Age, you know, when we had the very wealthy industrialists and so on, you know, the Rockefellers and all those guys. So those were the two main buildings. That was used essentially by the Jesuits as a residence. And as far as I know, and what I've been told, St. Patrick's Day, it had to be St. Patrick's Day because there were a lot of Irish Jesuits on the faculty, you know. That was, in 1942, they signed the papers and the school was created. It's worth mentioning, and I always bring this up with the headmasters, including Mr. Cashman, that we have permission to build not only a secondary school, but of course the university, which opened later, and even an intermediate school. We could open a middle school if we wanted. It's in our charter, you know. So, and in those days, if you were a prep student, you had a choice of two tracks. You could go scientific or classical. Everybody had to take Greek and Latin was required. So you could imagine what a task that would be. I had a hard time with Spanish, never mind, Greek. Uh, anyway, we had an opening school day of 319 students, as you can see. And they originally weren't going to open it up to upperclassmen. They wanted to start from the ground up with freshmen on up. But there was such an outpouring of support for the school and people begging them to open it up, and so they eventually did. And of course, they had that famous Mass of the Holy Spirit, which unites all Jesuit schools, and starts every school year. And the first one was done on September 11th. Of course, look at the time, September 11th. This is where we are getting very close to what big event in history, 1942. Pearl Harbor, right, December 7th? So the school is opening just as the war is about to begin. Here's our first principal. They called them principals back then rather than headmaster or president. Father Leo Riley, I always say he had a real Irish brogue. He was born in Ireland and was a really great guy. What I liked most of all as a person who was studying history is that he kept a headmaster's journal. Every day he put entries in this journal, handwritten, like a big notebook. And for me, it was a treasure trove of information because I was getting, you guys know about research, primary sources, right? This is a primary source. He was telling us what was happening day by day in the school. So for me, it was a great revelation. And I used to teach in what was previously McAuliffe Chapel. They turned that into a humanities classroom. I like to show this picture all the time because if you look at the second row, the second person in, that is Jeffrey Townsend Cuffey. And I've always been proud, and I think Prep should be proud of the fact that from the very beginning of our existence, we were an integrated school. And a lot of schools were not, be they public or private. There was a lot of de facto segregation. Of course, in the South, there was Jim Crow segregation, right? Now, Jeff Cuffey, I wish I could spend days on him. I want to write a book on him and his family. His mother was the first social worker of color in the state of Connecticut. Jeff went on to be a reverend himself. He was an Episcopalian. And he went on to be a prime mover in the civil rights movement. And even went down to Sing Sing prison on the Hudson River and taught courses in African American history to the prisoners there. And in those days, we didn't have any kind of concern for prisoners by and large for education, and so he was pioneering an educational system for people. Pretty cool, great guy. And then what happens? All of a sudden, prep is very popular. They want to add more students. No room in that building. And they want to then build a new building, which ultimately became Berkman's Hall, but they couldn't get permission. So what do? They turned to help of their local congressperson. Her name was Claire Booth Luce. She was the wife of Henry Luce. Anybody know Henry Luce? Study him, come up in your courses? Yeah, he was a big newspaper guy. He was actually born and raised in China. But Henry Luce, he was a very, very powerful man. But despite that, they couldn't get permission from the government to get the supplies that they needed to build our school. So what happened was they did a stopgap measure. I call it a quick fix. They bought a building in Bridgeport on Park Avenue. And they named it Loyola Hall. And there's a picture of it. And that became a freshman building for mostly the guys who lived on the Milford side, of the state. And so if you're coming from Stratford or Milford in West Haven, you might go to school there, and then they would bus you over to the campus here for sports. When Berkman's Hall was built, they sold this to Bridgeport University. And then, unfortunately, the place burned down. So we can't visit it. It's not there anymore. But what can you do? So here we go. Groundbreaking, for the buildings in 1947. And here's Berkman's under construction. And I might add, as that building was completed, now Fairfield University kicks in. You know, all the old-time Jesuits I talked to and the old-time lay faculty said, you know, prep came first. We had students in 1942. They didn't have students until 1947. The charter was granted that they could have a school, but they didn't have an active student body until 47. So prep came first. It's still first in my heart, but what do I know? All right. Now, of course, ultimately, what we all wanted, what we all pined for, was having a connector building. Because what a pain it was running across from Berkman's to Xavier and back and forth in the rain and the snow, and teachers saying, you can't wear a jacket in my classroom, but it's snowing out there, you know, that kind of thing. So anyway, we finally got that Arupe Hall, as it's called, the connector building. So now, here's where I start to come in, of course. I'm a person who thinks that biographies are very integral to the study of history. As Ralph Waldo Emerson said, there is properly no history, only biography. A sociology student that I am, C. Wright Mills, great sociologist, he said that the proper subject for sociologists is to study the intersection of biography and history. So you are all making history. Your individual biographies are contributing to the history of the school. And I think history is made when biographies or life stories merge or clash with others or clash with institutions and so on. So that brings you to my story. I'm a New York City kid, born and raised in Brooklyn, in Queens, New York. Spent my freshman high school year at Rice High, 124th Street and Lenox Avenue in Harlem. Went there on a partial basketball scholarship. I thought I was good until I went uptown. I wound up on the bench, but I learned a lot. And my biggest thrill was playing a scrimmage game against a guy named Lou Alcindor from Power Memorial, because both schools were run by the Irish Christian Brothers. Ever hear that name? Becomes a guy named Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. We're about the same age, if you know. Anyway, I took a shot toward the hoop from the side. He just swatted it back at me. That was the end of that. So, I'm a State University guy. Proud of it, actually. State University of New York at New Paltz, up the Hudson River to the west side, beautiful country. I was an anthropology major and a sociology minor. And we had an old campus. That old campus was where all the protests were held. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then a new campus later. And as a student of anthropology, I looked for the primary source records. And I was particularly interested in how it affected Native Americans, or in those days we still called them American Indians. And sure enough, I found out that the Jesuits had a lot of interaction with the Native Americans, who were known by the Indians as the Black Robes. And of course, Isaac Jogues, among others, were there preaching among the Indians. And here is the record of their work with the Indians. It's the Jesuit Relations and Allied Documents. Great primary source if you're doing a research paper on colonial history, you know. And I actually found, surprisingly, that the Jesuits were pretty objective in their discussion of the Indian lifeways and so on. And then I was also interested in Asian studies. And I ran into the work of Matteo Ricci. He was a great Jesuit who is actually still loved in China. If you go to Shanghai Museum, brand new museum they built about a decade ago, they have a whole wing dedicated to Matteo Ricci. So they still respect him even today. And of course, the Jesuits got in a little trouble because the more conservative Catholics were accusing them of going native because they cooperated so much with the Confucian leadership and the scholars there. So there was one other element of my college experience. I was in college from 1966 to 1970. That was the whole period of the campus upheavals and the protests against the war in Vietnam. And I must say, and I'm proud to say it, I was part of that anti-war movement. We didn't think that war was moral. We didn't think it was proper. We didn't think it was necessary. And so we protested. And so there you go. I don't see myself in that picture, but it could have happened. Anyway, much to my amazement and happiness, there were a lot of Jesuits in the anti-war movement. And two of them in particular, the Berrigan brothers. I'm not sure both were Jesuits. I think one certainly was. But you could see how popular they were. Rebel priests, love it. Philip and Daniel Berrigan, the Berrigan brothers. So here we go, all this is going on. And finally, in the summer of 1960, what a crazy year, 1969, right? Woodstock, the landing on the moon, and I go to Europe. I had a French girlfriend. I won't get into that right now. I met her in New York City, and she asked me the way to Greenwich Village. I say, oh, I know where Greenwich Village is. And off we went, and next thing you know, she invited me to France. And so the next year I went, and I traveled all around Europe. Stopped for a while. It was a beautiful town, Lyon, France. Great food. Of course, I didn't eat much of great food. I ate from street vendors, you know. But I met a guy when I was hitchhiking. I did a lot of hitchhiking back then. My wife says, you were crazy. I said, well, it was 1969. It was okay. And this guy stops to pick me up. And he's driving this white Peugeot automobile with gold trim, you know. He says, where you going? I said, I'm going south where it's warmer. I was heading to Spain. He said, well, so am I. Do you want to help me drive down there? I have to go see my wife. She's waiting for me. And my father-in-law, they're down in Torremolinos in southern Spain. So off we went. And this is not his villa, but we didn't have cell phones back then to take snapshots of everything. But it was like this. His wife played violin in the Venezuelan National Orchestra, and his father-in-law was the conductor. And they had just come back from a tour of East Europe. They're great people. Anyway, I stayed with them for about a week. Nice swimming pool, the whole bit. And before I left, he said to me, look, I'd love to hire you to work in my company. And he had been the president of Harrods department store. I said, I don't want to be in retail. I want to go back to school and be an anthropologist, you know. He says, well, let me give you some advice. If you don't want to work for me, and you can keep my address and write me anytime you want, he says, but just advertise yourself. Don't answer want ads. He said, I never hire people for want ads. I have to allow them in because the law says I have to allow, but I always go to people who I am attracted to because they came to me and said, I'd like to work for you. So that with that advice, a nice country there, boy. In 1971, after I graduated from college, I started sending letters out. And my resume, and one of the places I sent to was Fairfield Prep, with all this stuff in my memory about my interest in what the Jesuits had been doing in Native American studies and so on. So much to my surprise, they called me in for an interview. The man I first met, Tim McGillicuddy, one of the pillars of prep. Amazing guy. Let me tell you something. This man contributed so much to Fairfield Prep. And his son, Brian McGillicuddy, was one of the best athletes in the school history. He was a receiver on the football team and went on to great things, including playing for UConn. So, an amazing guy. So he interviewed me. Speaking of sports, here is the bird, Bob Sylvester, who had just come off the championship 1969 basketball season. Arguably the greatest basketball coach in Prep's history. I started talking to him about my interest in the school, and he said, do you know anything about sports? I said, yeah, I played basketball in high school. He said, would you like to coach freshmen here? I could use somebody. I said, well, that'd be great. So I had a connection with him. And then there's a guy that became an advisor, friend, godfather to all of us, Lou Sirocco. And by the way, he was the department chair, I don't know, forever, in social studies. But today's a day of giving, is it not? This man gave his entire estate to Fairfield Prep. Now, he was a bachelor, he never married, he lived only a few blocks away from here, but when he left, and I tried to talk him into sharing some of that with the history department. He says, no, you get a beer after school, but you don't get money. I said, okay. So he left it all to Prep. And of course, ultimately, the headmaster or principal back then was a guy named Father Jerry Starrett. So I interviewed with all these people. Starrett said to me, so what would you teach? I said, I don't know, I'm an anthropology major and a sociology minor. He says, well, we don't have those things. We don't have those subjects. I said, well, maybe you should. So I said, oh, I probably shouldn't have said that. And the interviews I didn't think went all that great, so I went away thinking I didn't have a chance at the job. Suddenly, they call me back. And they call me back and say, well, we don't have a job in social science, but we think you might be a good dean of men, a dean of students. I said, what? Yeah, he said, why don't you come in for an interview? I want to talk to you again about being the dean of students here. Now, I was 21 years old at the time, right out of college, right? And so they called me in. I never forget it. I drove in the parking lot. We parked right out in front here. My wife and I, we had just gotten married, right out of college. Still married. Still married. We have our 55th anniversary on August 22nd of this summer, So, and they said, oh, those hippies, they don't last. Their marriages never last. They're too free. But we are still together and very much in love. Anyway, so we drive in. We're sitting there. I go in to interview with Father Starrett. And this wonderful elderly priest is walking around the parking lot. And he sees my wife sitting there. She's reading a magazine of some kind. And he pokes his head into the window, thinking that she's a Laurelton girl, and she's waiting for some prep senior. So he says, young lady, you have to get back to campus. You have to go back to school. We can't have you sitting around here waiting for the prep boys. She says, no, I'm not waiting for one of the prep boys. I'm waiting for my husband. And he says, your husband? Why is he here? She says, well, he's interviewing for a job. And Father Devi says, what job is that? And she says, well, he's interviewing to be dean of men. He says, that's my job. They hadn't told him that he was being replaced. So that's how he found out from my wife that he was being replaced as dean of men. Now, here's the crazy thing. Jesuits never really go away. They just get recycled. So they just moved him back to the classroom. And so as I'm interviewing with Father Starrett, he says to me, so John, have you had any experience in administration? And I foolishly, and I even blurted it out, I said, well, this may blow the interview, but, well, Father, the closest I come to being in the administration was, I was part of the group that occupied the administration building last summer with the I should say, college uprisings. And he said, oh, the guys will love you. You're hired. So that was the way it worked. When I came here, just starting, Prep had more than 50% of the faculty Jesuit. And there was only one woman on the faculty. That was Mrs. Betty Katchmar. And there she is. Listen, if you were here when Betty was here, Mama Kay, you would love her. The guys all loved her. She was the greatest advocate for the students. She was a great art teacher and very popular. two people that you should know about if you know anything about Prep's history. To the left is Earl Lavery, Duke, arguably the greatest football coach in history. To the right is Father Brissett, the school chaplain. You'd always see him pacing on the sidelines with his rosary beads at the football game. And there I am, in my new job. You can see my sideburns looking very classy there, you know. Around me, some characters. I'm not going to get Don Ivanko, Eddie Becker. These guys I had in my office. I gave more jugs to them than almost anybody else. Seniors, by the way, could leave campus, and they had a smoking lounge. They could actually, believe it or not. Oh, well, this I'm not going to get into in any great detail, but there was a rumor that the kids had a place that they called the caves, where they would hang out during free periods. And I said, where are these caves? And nobody wanted to tell me. I was trying to feel out the students and get some information. It turns out that they were the former root cellars for McAuliffe Hall. Back in the old days, they used to have underground storage for potatoes and stuff to keep them fresh. So I found my way back there, and sure enough, you had to get a flashlight to get in there because it was very dark. There were tables, chairs, you know, candles, occasional beer bottles around. And I said, the caves, you know. And so I then was able to hang out there at the appropriate time and catch these guys who might be cutting classes when they were in the caves. The gunpowder incident I think I shouldn't talk about, but I'll skip it. Am I running out of time?
You got it. You have plenty of time.
All right. So here's I don't know if you want it. Kathy, I'm violating my promise to you on this one. But here's the thing about the gunpowder. For a while there, every afternoon, right about 1 o'clock, right about after lunch period, some idiot was setting off firecrackers back behind Berkman's. And the faculty started complaining. I'm trying to teach and firecrackers. What are you going to do about it, Mr. Dean, man? And I said, I don't know. I'm working on it. That's a good phrase. I'm working on it. So finally, Father Starrett and the other administrators, we all got together, and they said, okay, at 1 o'clock today, we're going to do a blitz. And we're going to catch that son of a gun, whoever he is. And you're going to go out of this door. You're going to go out of that door. You're going to go out, you know. So we all had our timing. As soon as we heard the first firecracker going off, we would all converge and catch this character. Now, mind you, in the days before the Recplex was built, there were woods out there, just trees and shrubs, and you could easily duck in there, which we thought, you know, the culprit was doing. And sure enough, we heard a firecracker go off. And we all come running out, and we see all these kids scattering into the woods. Somebody, as he's running, throws a vial onto the ground, you know, a medical vial. And one of the administrators picks it up and he says, John, I've got the gunpowder. We didn't catch the kid, but we said, well, at least we got his, you know, his fireworks. I open it up, look at it, smell it. I says, it's pretty powerful stuff, but it ain't gunpowder. It's something else. Now, well, you know, it helped to be in college in the 60s, you know what I'm saying? I was prepared. I was informed. I was hip. So that's that. Meanwhile, prep, all these things that were happening at the university level were, in fact, you know, filtering down to prep. And we had lots of changes going on. I don't know even how that got there, that guy with the... My computer started freaking out. But we had various changes. One of the things, in the interest of time, I'm just going to talk about dress code changed. If you look at the yearbooks and the photos in the yearbooks during the 1970s, you'll see guys without jackets and ties. I notice many of you have no jackets and ties. Is that gone now again? Just for today. Well, but back then, that was, you had to have a jacket and tie when I came on campus. And we decided that we could change it, and we should change it in keeping with the times. And sure enough, we dropped the jacket and tie requirement. So if you look at the yearbooks, you'll see guys dressed very casually. And you could also have long hair. And a lot of guys did, and I mean long hair. I mean, I had long hair in college, but these guys had, the Dwayne Allman look, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, and that continued like that. And by the way, prep reflects the general trends of society. So what happens circa 1980, all you historians out there, who gets elected in the election of 1980 in the United States? Right, Ronald Reagan. Most people consider that an onset of a decade of conservatism. And sure enough, we had a new headmaster, came up from Fordham. His name was Father O'Brien. And Father O'Brien wanted that dress code back. And so, sure enough, all of a sudden, we get to the 80s, Father O'Brien's term, and you see jacket and tie back. So that ties into the larger trends, But there were other things that were important that I thought were great. Mini courses. We would have a break from the regular schedule, originally twice a year, but eventually just once, where we would have different courses. You would do things that were out of the ordinary. And there would be 1 3-hour course or 2 1.5-hour courses. I offered courses on African American history, American Indians, museum techniques, and even an introduction to meditation in keeping with my Eastern roots. So, the most popular one was Mr. Canuel. He was a biology teacher. He had something called Here, Kitty, Kitty. It had to do with dissection of a creature, Anyway. Also, by the way, our service trips got their start through the mini-course system. And one of the things my mini-course guys did was replication of Native American culture. And look what they did. They created this totem pole. Pretty cool, right? Northwest Coast Indian totem pole. Down at the bottom, I got this from the yearbook. It says Spanky's ancestors. If you were around long enough, you knew who Spanky was, right? It was a reference to a coach at St. Joe's. St. Joe's was one of our was the big rival back then. They threw that out one summer when I wasn't around to stop them. But anyway. And the other thing we did, the guys insisted on making a dugout canoe. Now, I say, that guy is not a prep student. Dress code or not. That's not an authentic picture, it's just an example. Now, here's the deal. Native Americans had 2 kinds of canoes. One would be the birch bark canoe that you would see, but a lot of the people who didn't have access to that kind of bark would make dugout canoes. And my guys said to me, let's replicate a dugout canoe. I said, no, that's going to be difficult, because what they did was, as you could see, they put hot coals inside the trunk of a tree, and then they would hack it out with stone tools. So my guys said, let's go and do that. So back behind McAuliffe Hall, we, sure enough, started to work on a dugout canoe with the hot coals and everything. I should have known better, because this guy is smart, though. For all his appearance, he's doing it right near a water source. I'm doing it where a bunch of leaves all around. And so one of the guys pushes the canoe, and it rolls over, and the coals spill into the leaves. And so this is my biggest mistake. And I said, there goes my job, man, because the flames started going up in the weeds behind the building. Luckily, as Dean of Men, I knew that there was a fire hose, at the bottom of the building in McAuliffe. So I ran up there and got the damn hose and put out the fire. So we eventually got the canoe to exactly what we wanted it to be, what we wanted it to look like, but we had to test it to see if it worked, because we were replicating an American Indian canoe. So we got the smallest, thinnest guy in the class. It was Larry Menta, who, by the way, came back and became basketball coach here. It's a long story. But Larry was very thin and very small, and we brought the canoe down to the pond, right? You all know the pond down there at the bottom of the hill. And we said, okay, this is the big day. Larry, you're going to go across that pond and see if our canoe works. Well, the thing went right down like a rock. And he's sitting there looking like, what do I do, John? And the water's coming up around his neck. Could you imagine my thrill of having to bring him home to his mom and say, your son needs a change of clothes? Well, how did that happen? I said, well, I screwed up. So that didn't work. So, intersection of biographies. My students, one of the things I loved to do, we had great extracurriculars. I had a Stratomatic tabletop baseball. You guys ever play tabletop baseball? You roll the dice and you get a double six, it's a home run and so on. It was very popular back then. And that's before computers, you know. My whole life is before computers until now, but that's all right. So here I am with my tabletop guys. And in the back is a mural that we put together in sociology class. All of these kids became famous. As a matter of fact, this guy right here, that's Frank Ficco. Frank Ficco went on to be in charge of security here at Fairfield University. He must be retired by now, I think. The guy right in the middle with the sweater looking out at us, that's a guy named Casey King. Casey didn't graduate from prep. He was only here for a couple of years, but we became very close friends. He was a great kid. He had to leave when his family moved. But this is what Casey's doing now. Casey King, having taken my African American Studies mini course, went on to major in history, and now he's director of the capstone program at the Jackson Institute for Global Affairs at Yale University. And that's one of the more recent books that he has written. Every now and then, out of the blue, Casey calls me up. And the last time he called me was, he said, hey, I heard you had a rough day, John. I said, what do you mean? He says, yeah, that kid probably deserved to get kicked out of class. And somehow he knew I kicked somebody out of class, which I didn't do very often. But if you needed it, you had to do it. You know what I'm saying? Some kids just need to be kicked out. but I always brought them back. It was okay. And by the way, as dean of men, before we expelled somebody, I always took them out to lunch at Dutchess before. Hey, enjoy your hamburger. By the way, you're out of here, as John Brennan would say. Another guy, great friend, former student of mine, Tim Shannon. Tim Shannon is down at Gettysburg. He took my anthropology class and studied American Indians with me. And you can see here one of his great books, Indians and Colonists at the Crossroads of Empire. And I hear from him every now and then. If you get down to, any of you guys going to Gettysburg, look up Tim Shannon. He's department chair of history, great man. He appears on television a lot too, on these programs on the French and Indian War and so on. Then there's Colin Jondrell. Rudy, Colin is down at Providence. He was in my Modern Asia class, and he went to Georgetown. Was contemporary. My daughter knows Colin. She was at Georgetown at the same time as Colin, and they were both studying Asian studies. My daughter is a China scholar, and he was Japan. And sure enough, here he is. His book, Samurai to Soldier, has won a lot of awards. And he's very popular with the students there. Then there's this guy, good old Andrew. Andy Maslowski, anybody who was here when he was around knows what a great kid he was. And not only did he take my courses, he was president of my political awareness club. And he went down to Georgetown as well. My daughter is good friends with him. And he studied Middle Eastern studies. And now he is, well, I think he's still got a job, you don't know, Department of State, Middle East Partnership Initiative. Very, very talented kid. And then Andrew Davenport. Andrew's got a very unique biography. He is a descendant of the black Jeffersons. I'm sure you heard the story of Thomas Jefferson's, right, affair and the children that came of that. Andrew was a descendant of the black Jeffersons. He graduated from prep, was a great student, and went down to Georgetown for his doctorate. Before he did that, he even worked here as a faculty member for a while in the history department. He was just on television. I just saw him on the Jefferson special that they had on TV, and he was interviewed. He's a brilliant scholar, and here's the point I'm making. These people, we intersected. Maybe I influenced them, probably not that much, but I get more from them than they ever got from me because I'm so proud of them. And I look at you guys out there, and I'm wondering how many of you will be doing things of this nature, you know, in the future. And I realize academia is not that popular today, but boy, what a great life. To live in a world of ideas, a world of books, a world of dialogue and conversation. You can't beat it. Meanwhile, there's the athletic side. That came out blurry. I had the good fortune of teaching all of the Drury brothers. There were 3 Drury brothers. Ted Drury, he was the older brother, class of '89. There he is. He actually played for the Hartford Whalers, believe it or not, for a while. That team existed. Now they're the Carolina Hurricane, of course. And of course, Chris, my good buddy. Both those guys wore number 18 here at Prep. In the pros, they had to get different numbers. Here's Chris, and when he was captain of the New York Rangers, he won the Stanley Cup with the Colorado Avalanche. And by the way, Ted's son is Jack Drury, who's now in the NFL and playing for the Colorado Avalanche. Chris, aside from having a great career as a hockey player, went on, and he is today, I think he still has the job. He's the president and general manager of the New York Rangers. And of course, I've been a Ranger fan since the early 1960s, since the days of the gag line. Hatfield, Rattel, and Gilbert, goal a game. And so this is very good for me to have a friend in Madison Square Garden. And I'll just move on with some of these people. All passed away now, unfortunately. Well, not all, but many of them. Father Jim Bowler is the guy who encouraged the teaching of Asian studies, and he also encouraged me to teach American Indian studies. Father Charlie Allen, great man. One of the greatest speakers I've ever heard. Everybody loved him. And during his tenure here, we won the National Award for Excellence in Education. Father Jim Arrimond, controversial guy, came out here from Loyola in Chicago. I have, you see there, Raspberry Beret, because this was his reputation. He loved sports, and he would always come to the football games or the hockey games, and he would pace along the sidelines. And he always wore a beret. It was literally, a reddish, colored, raspberry colored. Now, do you ever hear the Prince song, Raspberry Beret? You know Prince, right? If you don't, I'm going to be angry with you. One of the great contributors to popular culture. So every time Father Arrimond would come onto the field to attend the game, the kids would start singing. They'd be in the stands, they'd start singing, Raspberry Beret. And he never figured out what that was all about. But he was a good man. And he was a big supporter of my prep history project. He and I have something in common. And by the way, he has not passed. He's retired, but not Anyway, here's the date that he and I have in common. October 28th, 1981. Crazy, right? Random. That was the day I almost died from a bee sting. I was in my classroom in McAuliffe. We had no screens. Somebody threw a bubble gum wrapper, tried to get it out the window, but it was sitting on the windowsill. I went to pick it up, just randomly. I'm talking about Buddhism, nirvana, you know. I go to pick it up, and something stings me. It's a yellow jacket. I don't think anything of it. I'd been stung many times before, and all of a sudden I start getting woozy, dizzy, sweating, lumps, hives. My students say, hey, you better get down to the nurse's office. You're not looking well. So I stagger down from McAuliffe to the nurse's office down on the first floor of Berkman's. Janet Smith was the nurse, a great lady. She saved my life. She had EpiPens in the refrigerator, you know, with the adrenaline, with the epinephrine. And she gave me a shot, called the ambulance, drove me over to the hospital. I was in that hospital for like 7 hours. They called my wife, Louis Sirocco called my wife up and said, hey, John's not going to be home for a while. He's in the hospital. She says, oh my God, what's going on? He told her the story. She drove all the way down from Shelton, we were living at the time, to the hospital and picked me up, left my car here in the parking lot. And the reason why this date is so important to me, aside from almost dying, and obviously they saved me because here I am, but that was the day before my daughter Marcella was born. And the next morning, I had passed out on a sofa from all the drugs that were giving me to fight the reaction. And my wife is shaking me, and she says, John, you got to get up, you got to get up. I said, call into prep. They know I was sick yesterday with the bee sting. She said, no, you don't understand. I've been in labor all night. She said, the baby's coming. So I had to get up, cold shower, rushed her down to Park City Hospital here, and later that day, my daughter Marcy was born. Well, here's the crazy thing. Little did I know that the same night I was in the hospital, so was Father Aramond. There was some kind of prep event here. I forget exactly what it was, but shortly after making a presentation at the prep event, he was stricken with a severe heart attack. And so he was rushed to the hospital. I think it was the same hospital, St. Vincent's, which would have been logical. And he and I were on the ropes in the same hospital, probably at the same time. And when we found out about the coincidence, it was a big, joke, of course, with us. But then we started sending anniversary cards to each other. So every year on the 28th, we would send cards to each other. I'd go to my mailbox, and sure enough, there would be happy anniversary, Father Jim. We eventually stopped after he moved back out to the Midwest, but it's just one of those quirky things that you'll never forget. So in the late 80s, I began working on the prep history. My students always said to me, yeah, history, we can't do anything about history. All we can do is read history. I said, no, anybody can do history, the history of your family. I've been researching my family, my roots, going ancestry and all that stuff, learning some crazy things about my own ancestors, like one of my ancestors was a fighter pilot in World War II. He was Polish, obviously, but the Poles had lost to the Germans, and so a lot of the Polish military guys snuck across lines and went to work for the British in the Royal Air Force. So one of my ancestors flew for the British Air Force. So now brings us to today, and 21st century, crazy, right? Boom. 9/11, 2001, right? What a way to start the new century. Everybody who was alive then knows exactly where they were, I remember it well. My son-in-law was at NYU doing a master's degree very close to where the towers were hit. My daughter was down at Georgetown, and of course they were going after the military, the Pentagon and so on down there. And so it's something you just never forget. And I think it changed everything, Air travel used to be easy. You could walk right in, you didn't have to worry about all this, anyway. Another big thing that affected us here, if you were on campus, you knew this was a big deal. They call it Superstorm Sandy in 2012. This, I believe, is a shot of of Fairfield or Milford, and the waters, the destruction was incredible, right? And Fairfield, this parking lot was filled with, first responder vehicles and tents and so on, and they needed this to go down and work and help get the people out of their homes, and dogs and cats and all that stuff. Crazy. And of course this one, right? I'll never forget this. Terry, my wife and I went to a hockey game in February of 2020 down in New York. Rangers, Bruins. The Bruins beat us. I was very upset. I did meet Brett Stockdale in a restaurant there before the game, Father Stockdale. And I went to that game, had an enjoyable day, came back, prep is still going on, but we know that COVID's lurking. You're hearing stories, you're hearing stories, you're hearing stories. Next thing you know, now it's March, and right around this time in 2020, the administration makes the decision, this thing is heating up really bad. We're going to have to send everybody home, and you're going to have to work remotely. And we were doing Zoom classes for the rest of that semester. Turned out to be my last, hurrah at prep. I had already pretty much decided that I was going to retire. After all, it was my 49th year, and so the story goes, there was a curse. Nobody ever lasted 50 years. And I didn't want to try to challenge that curse. Now, Louis Sirocco said he made it, but he was only teaching part-time but that doesn't count. But, and so we had to go home, and I had to go and do Zoom class. If you think it's hard paying attention to me standing here, could you imagine how little attention you'd be paying to me if I was on some stupid screen, right? The students would put their face up there, a picture of themselves, and they were out having a hamburger somewhere. And you know what? I gave out more D's. It's true. I had a lot of seniors. I taught, senior classes and junior classes. I gave out more D's that year than I ever did. Not because I was bitter or angry. They just stopped doing stuff. They didn't turn anything in. Now, they should have been F's, but I was being nice about it. But I did give a lot of D's, and it was not a good way to end your career, I didn't get all the last chances of saying goodbye to people, shaking hands, going out to lunch with my friends and so on. And of course, there it is. And in case anybody doubts it, there are, anybody who thinks that COVID was a hoax is full of it. By the way, I've had COVID. Anybody here had COVID? Raise your hand if you had it. Yeah. So I guess it's not a hoax. I had it. And by the way, my wife is a fanatic. I've had every COVID vaccine. I've had every vaccine for everything. Sorry, Bobby Kennedy Jr. But you still got it, right? It turns out I was sicker than I thought. My wife is very paranoid about these things, and she had a barometer that you could put on your finger to test your blood oxygen level, and mine was dropping to the point where I was going to pass out and maybe be very ill. So she called my doctor, and he gave me that Paxlovid or whatever, and that pulled me out of it. So I'm still here, So here's the deal. Prep is you. You are prep. And I think just showing you some of the people that I have experienced and have run into, understand what a great institution this is. I mean it sincerely. I'm sort of a jaded guy. I don't take, things too emotionally, but I get emotional about Fairfield Prep. And I have had so many great relationships, faculty, students, athletes. Many of them I still see, I still communicate with, I still get letters from people, emails and so on. And it's a great community. And I just want you to know how strongly I feel about that, and I wish you the best. I hope you continue the great tradition of prep. And I know today's Giving Day, and Kathy, I have my my annual check here for the prep fund. It's not a lot, but it's something. And if everybody did something, especially all my alums out there, come on, man, you know, serve Mother Prep. She served you. That's my request. So here's my check, and thank you.